Good afternoon, and welcome to the sixth meeting of the Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council, which I formally declare to be open. Thank you all for being here today. I apologize for the last-minute change to all virtual, especially to those of you who flew into Washington yesterday or this morning. I was certainly looking forward to seeing folks in person, and I'm totally disappointed with the weather gods. You'd think with our National Weather Service members, we'd get a little preferential treatment around here. As an administrative note, I ask that everyone turn off their camera and microphone unless you're speaking. If you do wish to speak, please use the hand function on Teams and you'll be called on. Today, you will be presented with and be voting on 3 reports. A report on challenges to the development of O-RAN technology and recommendations on how to overcome them. A report on how virtualization technologies can be used to promote 5G security and reliability. And a report on WEA performance reporting. You also received updates from the remaining 3 working groups on their progress thus far and plans for the upcoming meetings. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the hard work of our members and acknowledge the extraordinary efforts that it sometimes takes to find consensus. These issues are not simple, and our wide array of stakeholders certainly bring a variety of positions and opinions on issues. The issues aren't simple, and agreement is not automatic. And I commend you all for your willingness to collaborate and show flexibility in order to move forward and get the work done. Today's reports truly reflect that commitment to consensus. Thank you. I now turn the meeting over to the Chief of the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Deb Jordan. Deb?
Thanks, Suzanne, and good afternoon, everyone. It is just barely afternoon, and likewise, Suzanne, I was hoping that there'd be an in-person meeting. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of CSRIC VIII. We have a full agenda, so I'll keep my comments very brief. As Suzanne noted today, our meeting will include presentations and council votes on 3 reports. These reports are address issues that are related to the development of secure Open RAN technology, the use of virtualization technologies to increase 5G security, and the enhancement and reliability of wireless emergency alerts. These 3 reports go to the heart of what CSRIC was formed to do, ensure the reliability and integrity of our public safety systems and the overall security of our nation's networks. To paraphrase Chairwoman Rosenworcel's remarks at CSRIC VIII's inaugural meeting more than a year ago, every day in our connected digital life, too many cyber events regularly occur with the capacity to threaten safety and well-being of people and businesses across the country, and no entity is immune. I welcome these 3 reports that CSRIC VIII has worked tirelessly to prepare and will vote on today, and I look forward to continuing to work to help mitigate these occurrences and improve our nation's safety security. I want to thank you all for working on these important initiatives. I know you have busy day jobs and issues you are tackling for CSRIC can be complex, but your contributions are valuable because the work you're doing can help Americans enjoy the benefits of secure 5G technology and promote public safety. Thank you all for your work and your diligence. With that, I'll turn back over to Suzanne.
Nazrin, our co-chair, will be addressing us.
Very good. Thank you very much. I echo Suzanne and Deborah's comments. We're getting to the part of the working group efforts where complex technical subject matter expertise are being discussed and debated. And as Suzanne mentioned, at times, very much appreciate the commitment to consensus and really working through some of these challenging set of architectural topics and set of recommendations. 3 topics, as we said, will be discussed, working group 2, 3, and 6. And after that, we'll get an update from all the other working groups. Before I get started, I'd like to do a quick roll call. So if you're here, as I read your name, please call out. I'll start with Brandon Abley.
Present.
Thank you. Rob Alderfer.
I'm here.
Colleen Andrews. Colleen Andrews.
Sorry, I couldn't get off mute here.
Very good. Mark Annis.
Mark Annis here.
Thank you. Mike Barnes.
Here.
Michael Bergman.
Here, thank you.
Donna Bethia Murphy.
Here, thank you.
Shirley Bloomfield. Shirley Bloomfield. Mary Boyd.
Yes, ma'am, here, thank you.
Billy Bob Brown, my partner in crime.
Present, thank you.
Wade Buckner.
I'm here.
Brian Daly.
Brian Daly is here.
Marla Dowell. Marla Dowell. Andrew Drodds. Andrew L. Drodds. I may be pronouncing your name wrong. Okay. Catherine Elkins. Harold Feld.
Here.
Craig Bugatti.
Here.
Michaela Duhot.
Here.
Martin Goldberg.
Here, thank you.
Ben Goldsmith.
Here.
Olaf. Dana Golub. Stephen Hayes.
Here.
Mark Hess.
Here.
Craig
Could you repeat that? Was that Craig Hoden? Looks like she froze.
Yeah, she froze.
Okay.
was that Antoine Johnson?
Nazrin, you froze right around Craig Hoden.
Okay, I'll repeat. Antoine Johnson. Craig Hoden.
Here.
Okay, very good. Everett Everett Kanishig, apologize, Kaneshige. Everett. Javad Khan.
Present.
Farouk Khatibi.
Present.
Jason Lish.
John Shield here for alternate as Jason Lish.
Very good. John Lish. Jennifer Manor.
Here.
Timothy May.
Present.
Maureen McLaughlin.
Brandon Hinton is here as an alternate for Maureen. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Brendan who?
Hinton, H-I-N-T.
Thank you. Danny McPherson.
Present.
William McCulkey.
Present.
Susan Miller.
Present.
Derek Peterson. Christina Pusak. Mark Reddish.
Hello, I'm here.
Travis Bruder.
Here.
Myself. John Rose.
Present.
Thank you. Travis Russell.
Virtual and dry.
Thank you. Francisco Sanchez.
Francisco's here.
Tom Sawanobori.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm here.
Tim Schramm,
Here.
Sean Scott. Paul Steinberg,
Present.
Padma Sudarshan,
I'm here.
Peter Tomczak,
I am here, Pete Tomczak.
Claire Vishik,
I'm here.
Steve Watkins,
Present.
Cicely Wolf,
Present.
George Woodward,
Present.
Henry Young,
Present.
Tim Youngblood.
Drew Moore standing in for Tim Youngblood.
Two more.
Morin, Morin.
Got it. All right, let me go back to those who I quickly missed at the top, if people joined. Shirley Bloomfield,
Tampa Ray is here as her alternate.
okay. One second. Then I go to Marla Dowell,
Doug Montgomery here as her alternate.
very good. Andrew Droz,
He is present, Nazarene. He sent a message on chat. I don't know if his microphone may not be working, but he is
No.
present.
very good. Catherine Elkins,
Brian Tegmeyer for Catherine Elkins.
alternate. Okay. And I finish this up quickly. Dana Golub. Antoine Johnson,
Excuse me, Dana Golub is here. Maybe her mic's not working. This is her alternate, Peter Scott, but Dana is here.
okay. Antoine Johnson. Everett Kaneshig, I apologize. Kaneshige. Okay. Derek Peterson. Christina Pusak. Sean Scott. All right, here we go. We'll start with presentation, Suzanne, for work group 2. We're done with roll call. Back to you.
Yes, we're going to be hearing from Mike Barnes and George Woodward on the report on challenges to the development of ORAN technology and recommendations on how to overcome them.
Thanks, Suzanne. It's George. I'll kick it off and try to get through the first 11 slides in the 1 hour that we have allocated. Is that correct? That was attempted humor. Sorry about that. Next slide. And I'm remiss. I was going to point out Mike Barnes, Marvin Ayer, of course, myself, and Zenji, our leader. Next slide. And I'll skip over a lot of this background and things because it's all going to be redundant. Objectives, we've covered that quite a bit, and we'll skip. The only thing I want to say on this slide is I've been involved in a few of these activities over the years. I have never seen this level. We talked about this at lunch today. I've never seen this level of participation. Suzanne, we had at least 15 very active participants, and by very active, I mean certainly spirited, both showing up at our meetings and very actively contributing to the report. So I've never seen anything like this. And that number could exceed 15 in any case. And I don't think we had a single meeting where we had less than 20 of our 22 people on board. That might have included a few alternates here and there. Next slide. Our alternates, and another slide, please. Pretty straightforward stuff. The only thing of any note on here is report complete November 22, and then complete version 2 and complete version 3 and complete version 7 with revision 19 went up to just probably a couple of days ago. So when I say spirited contribution, I truly mean that sincerely. Next slide. Mike and I are going to break up the presentation, so you're going to have to put up with me for a little bit longer, but we're going to follow this format. I'm going to finish us through, I think it is probably, it could be really just this slide. Mike, and you might have to correct me if we're
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah, I'll take
here.
Yeah, I'll take this part, and then you do the executive summary when we get to that.
Okay,
So
thanks.
yeah, that's what we had talked about. Yeah, I echo George. It's Mike Barnes. I echoed George's comments. Great collaboration. Suzanne, you mentioned collaboration and consensus. We had people from suppliers, operators, service providers, and government, NTI, NIST, CISA, and so on. Great effort, a little bit of arm wrestling, and a lot of collaboration. In terms of our report, it's structured executive summary, background, analysis, and then our recommendations to the SEC and industry, and our conclusion section. So this is just how we laid it out, following the guidelines, the CSRIC guidelines. Next slide. Our methodology, we studied these areas. So ORAN architecture, and then Open RAN cloud infrastructure, deployments, operations, supply chain, software development process. It was very broad, obviously, the areas that we covered in this, in our assignment, in our report, and our recommendations. Next slide. All right, George, you want to do these two, the executive summary, and then we'll go to the next ones.
Yeah. So a couple of things of note here. It took us a little while to get our arms around this whole idea of Open RAN. Does Open RAN create more opportunity for bad actors, less opportunity? And it became very, very clear early on, we really needed to establish that a closed proprietary architecture is just as vulnerable as open. Open presents obviously some new challenges, but it also addresses a number of things. So in all, and you'll see this throughout our report and in our conclusion, we're strong believers in Open RAN and believe that this not only can be deployed, but can be deployed as safe as anything else, and ultimately safer. So that was really the big one from a revelation standpoint. The other one really is in about what Mike mentioned just briefly there, and that was how broad this was. When we attacked it initially, we had a specific focus or an area of focus, and that broadened dramatically, and it required a fair bit of interaction with group 3, and because this is covering a tremendous amount of ground. Next slide. Trying to think, and I sort of covered the security concerns and our ultimate position on that. As another point in mentioning working group 3, and they're sitting in the conference room with me within striking distance, so I'm going to try to be well behaved. But just looking on core network architecture and cloud native, there was a tremendous amount of overlap. And I think both groups, it became fairly obvious that that'll overlap forever. And this is an ongoing effort. This is certainly a report with conclusions. It'll obviously have recommendations both for industry and for the FCC, but this is an ongoing event, and we're never going to have it behind us. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it back to Mike.
Okay, in terms of the background, we looked at the technology overviews for these areas. So the cellular RAN, Open RAN ecosystem, the RAN Alliance itself, which has a lot of the guidelines and standard type things which need to be followed, supply chain security risks, and then issues facing Open RAN deployment. So I was covered. Actually, go ahead and go to the next slide. Our analysis, there's just a few slides, very high level again. Open RAN architecture security, so you can see the pictures showing some of the attack vectors, who can attack the systems. So we're looking at secure management orchestration, the RICs, the RAN intelligent controllers, open front haul, OCloud, ORAN coexistence, and then just broader security considerations of Open RAN. Next slide. The development, we looked at software development, the different areas there. So evolution of software development, secure development phases, the NIST framework, and the ORAN software community, OSC. Next slide. Challenges to operations. So it's a multi-vendor environment. Far edge challenges to distributed far edge, and then training, operations, activities training, and compliance. Next slide. The supply chain, very critical area now. There's another working group, a CSRIC group that is making recommendations, made recommendations on supply chain, and we're aligned with those recommendations as well as other CSRIC working groups too. We coordinated with working group 3 very closely and some of the other working groups. But anyways, supply chain security, telecom supply chain in general. The SBOM is an important initiative that's required for, or is becoming required for any federal contracts, and industry is adopting this also. And then open source software. Next slide. Okay, George, you want to do the key recommendations, and I'll do the detailed ones.
Yes, I'll try. Next slide, please. And Mike, I may have to pull you in on a few of these things, but what our group really came across was all the groups working in this area, and we were fortunate in our working group because we had representatives, a broad set of representatives across government, industry, and academia. But it's in working with a number of the different agencies and interacting very, very directly. There was this focus on achieving global economies of scale that are going to show up in a few of our recommendations, both in FCC and in industry, because this is a complex issue, and with restrictions, we can get overly zealous on security at the expense of achieving global scale, where we have to get to in order to achieve unit economics that are going to really proliferate 5G, 6G, and beyond, and all of the Gs. Again, that's a reoccurring theme, accelerating the growth of the ecosystem. Next slide. Some very specific things, and Michael did dig deeper into this in the detail, but ADIS and again, getting close interaction amongst the various, if not numerous, federal agencies is going to be extremely important, both in maintaining some type of, or achieving some type of velocity, maintaining it, as well as achieving our global scale for the unit economics. The whole idea of zero trust architecture falls into virtually every aspect of this report. And I'm trying to think of what else I want to point out and still stay on track here. And again, I guess the final bullet with the facilitating the evolution. It's back to and in very integral part of our conclusions is that this is on the right track. The right types of players are involved. There'll be another CSRIC on this. It's an evolving process. But the real punchline is there's no greater vulnerability with ORAN, and I think that there was never an issue in our working group on that, but our working group dealt with that sort of generalized public perception. And Mike, if you want to take it and dig deep into it, go for it.
Yes, go. You want to go ahead and go into the details then? Yeah, go to the next slide, please. So this is a full list of the recommendations. We had a lot. That's why I had George do the summary. There was 21 recommendations, 7 for the FCC and 24 for industry. In the report, you will see at the bottom of the report is a list, the full list, and that's what's on these next 7 slides. Each recommendation shows the area of analysis that it came from in our report. So the first one is it's a recommendation for architecture discussion, architecture analysis to the FCC, and it's number 1 in that area, the first one in the area. And so this one is actually a recommendation for future activities. That's to a future CSRIC to consider the quantum computer threat. So this goes through. I'm going to go quickly in the interest of time because I know we have 3 groups trying to present just in about an hour. But that's the structure for the details. My point here was in the report, if you want to understand how we got to these conclusions or these recommendations, in the report, you can actually have a link at the bottom for each recommendation to the page, which discusses the how we got to the analysis is what I'm trying to say. So here we can see these. The second one to the FCC specific recommendations, establish a collaborative national 5G Open RAN emulation environment. And you can read the rest of that. Let's see. The third one is about making sure we have the right trained labor. So the trained engineers that we need. So developing a STEM workforce. These are somewhat long-term objectives. There is, visit the visa and skilled worker entry requirements. Are we getting enough of those? And then also looking at the HBCUs, as historically Black colleges and universities, and use them as a pipeline to help, a talent pipeline to help with critical engineering skills. Next one is in terms of development of Open RAN solutions to address market-driven use cases rather than mandating Open RAN requirements. And this is consistent with earlier CSRIC recommendations that have the market and the standards groups drive it rather than FCC itself. The last one on this slide, all right, so this is making sure, asking the FCC to look at export controls, working with other government agencies to ensure that the technology can be developed in a global way. So next slide. So this one was covered by George, actually, the acceleration of the growth of the Open RAN ecosystem through various incentives, through the Public Wireless Supply Chain Initiative Fund, the CHIPS program. I saw a few days ago there was an announcement for public input on this for what we get, something like $1.5 billion for this area related to telecom. The last one, not create new certification requirements for Open RAN products. That's related to the one we just discussed. You can go to the next slide. So these are getting to the recommendations for industry. And these are getting very specific. What George covered was, the high level of these. I don't know that we want to take the time to go through these individually. And maybe, Suzanne, if I could ask you, does that make sense that we don't read through these individually? They're available in the report, or should I actually go through each of these?
No, that's fine. I think that everyone has had the report for long enough that they should have read them already. So I think that you're right. They're substantial. So I think that that's probably a good call. Okay, good. And we did receive feedback from several people. And also I'd like to thank Suzanne and Zenji, others on the team there for the changes.
and the corrections that they made and such. And we did get feedback from several people on clarifications to the paper, to the report. So thank you for that. So if you can continue on to a slide that says conclusions. That one, conclusion, yeah. So this is kind of wraps it up from what George introduced in the executive summary. The concerns, these issues are both in Open RAN and closed proprietary solutions, the existing incumbent solutions. Generally, it's the same type of security type of issues. We see these in information and communications technology sector, ICT, and cloud infrastructure. We see with other types of groups having the same security issues there. And so, bottom line, Open RAN needs to adopt ICT, 5G best practices, and so on. What things that are already being done. Now, Open RAN does bring new capabilities. That's the second bullet, and concerns. So with induction of X apps and R apps, the machine learning technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, as well as some of the open front haul network connection or network requirements. So these are to some degree shared with other sectors, but still it does bring new concerns and capabilities, or with those new capabilities, it brings new concerns for security, reliability, interop, and those do have to be considered. We do expect, and George mentioned that the third bullet, that this will continue to evolve, and we continue to have the right, we'll have the right participation from industry, and for example, from the FCC to keep this moving, keep the system secure. So bottom line, CSRIC recommends that the FCC and industry act on the recommendations identified in this report by leveraging existing best practices to address common concerns and implementing the new processes to mitigate the new attack vectors. So thank you very much on behalf of me and George and the working group 2. That concludes our presentation here.
Do we have anyone who would like to comment?
Suzanne, it's George. There was I mean, there's a number of issues, but one of the things that came up at lunch today was sort of relative to velocity, likely the need to move closer to ICT and a little bit further away from 3GPP. There's not a formal recommendation in this report to that, but it was really about the standards bodies on sort of cellular, I guess in specific, that can slow down things. So as a group, I'll just voice what came up in the over the lunch discussions today with working group 3, that we don't want this to turn into a standards body nightmare that's monopolized by key players. This is Open RAN. It should be open and it should be fast, and that might be better served leaning a little bit more toward ICT. So that was all.
Okay, thank you, George. I appreciate that. Would anyone else like to speak?
Suzanne, it's Tim May with NTIA.
Yes.
How are you?
Yeah, you have the floor.
As Mike referenced an announcement that NTIA made on Monday, we announced that we are going to be requesting public comment on development and implementation of the Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund. By way of background, the fund, it's a $1.5 billion grant program and designed to support promotion and deployment of open, interoperable, and standards-based radio access networks. It was authorized under the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. It's funded through the CHIPS and Science Act of 22. It's an historic investment, and it's principally aims to strengthen U.S. leadership in global telecommunications ecosystem, foster competition, lower costs for consumers, and strengthen our supply chain. For its part, NTIA is charged with administering the Innovation Fund and establishing criteria for grants awarded. Now, if you look at the report, section 5.5.1.1, it makes a specific recommendation to the Commission on how it can accelerate growth of the Open RAN ecosystem through incentives, including consulting with the Department of Commerce on specific areas of funding. given that NTA has just initiated the process for gathering input to the grant program and remains open to all input, NTA will be abstaining from voting on this report. Now, I want to be clear, the report's 24 recommendations to industry and the other 6 recommendations to the Commission are substantive contributions to a fuller understanding among stakeholders of how to ensure the ORAN ecosystem grows on a foundation of strength and trust. The report reflects the hard work and serious thought brought to bear by the members of the working group. And with respect to the RFC, those comments will provide vital input and recommendations for consideration in the development and implementation of the grant program. We encourage all commenters to come forward using that mechanism. Written comments are going to be due January 27th next year. And in addition to that, we will be hosting a public virtual listening session on January 24th, 2023. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Nazrin, do you want to take over?
Yep. Okay. So I'd like to take a vote on this, the recommendations of Working Group 2. Does anyone vote nay to this set of recommendations? Okay. I'd like to hear you call out whether you vote yay.
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 Very good. Thank you. Back to you, Suzanne.
Thank you. It sounds like the yays have it. So the report on challenges to the development of ORAN technology and recommendations on how to overcome them is adopted. Thank you. I will note that this concludes Working Group 2's task, and we certainly have deep appreciation for the work of the entire group, and especially for the co-chairs Mike Barnes and George Woodward, and a special thanks to Zenji, who served as the FCC liaison and did an excellent job. We really appreciate all of your work on this, and we'll miss you all moving forward. And now we'll turn to the second report on how virtualization technologies can be used to promote 5G security and reliability, and that will be given to us by Michaela and John.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to provide our thoughts and our work in the form of this report. I'll go through the first few slides, which are the easy ones, and then I'll leave the heavy lifting to John, which is basically covering the recommendations. So if you can, absolutely. Thank you, Jeff, for all the help that you have provided, and Suzanne as well. We had some questions at the beginning. Actually, through mid-project, we had some questions that we had to clarify, and your help on clarifying those questions is very appreciated. So let's go to the next slide. So we have actually 2 deliverables. One, it's the one that we are doing today in how virtualization technologies can be used to promote 5G security and reliability. And the other one, it's the role of the FCC. That's going to be another report that we will deliver in June next year. Next slide, please. So here is the objective, and the objective that you see here may be a little bit different than what it was initially provided in terms of just with the clarifications that we have asked for. So, initially we thought, is the report going to be focused only on Open RAN versus the whole network? So we clarified it was for the whole network, so it's not only the sort of the elements of the Open RAN. So we did have to provide that context. And then we also looked at different recommendations in terms of the ecosystem, and we tried to clarify whether the ecosystem meant that the vendor ecosystem or also the smaller service providers. So we clarified that as well. Thank you. So we can go to the next slide. Working group was a really good team of people. We had some key contributors, and I want to thank those that contribute on a per meeting basis. We had some good discussions. We had some, interesting discussions at the end, but it all came together, and we are very happy with the results. So thank you for all the members that participated in our team, as well as the alternates, which are on the next slide. Thank you. So the deliverables, we followed pretty closely the schedule that we put forward. We are going to start working on the second report early in January. So I think I have to say, though, that having a face-to-face meeting sort of at the beginning or like mid-project after we did all the research helped us quite a bit in setting the framework for the paper. So I think we will continue to try to have at least one face-to-face to get everybody together and make sure that we are all in sync. Next slide, please. So the methodology was we followed was to initially review everything that has been written so far, because virtualization has been around for some time, and clearly there were a lot of lessons learned and papers published on virtualization, as well as virtualization of network components like the core, which has already gone through that in terms of in the telecom world. So we have reviewed all the existing materials. The next thing that we have done, it's really invited a slew of researchers and teachers and technologists to present their views and their findings about the different issues with virtualizations and attacks and vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. And that was very interesting, and we learned quite a bit from the different bodies that people that came and presented to us. Further, we actually performed an assessment of the implementation of best practices and reviewed the results from test labs and real-life deployments around the world. As some of all this, as George said before, this is ongoing work, and we will have lessons that we will learn in the next few years as well. So we have some technology challenges ahead of us, and I'm sure we will overcome them, but it's good to understand what people have learned so far. The next thing that we have done, it's really looked at the comparison between virtualized and non-virtualized security vulnerabilities, because a lot of people consider that there are more security vulnerabilities with virtualization. And in fact, some of the presentations show that there were vulnerabilities that existed from 3G, from 3G, and there continue to be and have nothing to do with virtualization itself. So those were good things to highlight as well. And then we have gone to identify the issues that need to be addressed by the Commission, and we have provided the high-level recommendations. And I have to say, we have done a lot of work that it's actually captured in the appendices. And again, as George mentioned, we have worked quite closely with Group 2 in terms of looking at the vulnerabilities and the attacks and the mitigation factors and taxonomy and all that it's captured in the appendices. One thing that I do want to mention before we go to the results is that we have looked at also, actually, let's go to the next slide, please. Because it talks about the document structure. So the way we have started to look at was very much from a security perspective, and then we realized that the role of this document is actually to see how we can leverage virtualization, not necessarily to look how bad it is, but actually look at the good things and see how we can actually leverage that to secure better the 5G network. So it took us a little bit to just make sure that we are in sync with that, and we are not trying to recreate something or create something that it was not really in the scope. Then we looked at the broad concept of virtualization as a practice. As I mentioned, this has been around for quite some time, and telecom has it's been 10 years, 12 years since we started in telecom. So that was also covered by the report. And then we looked at the virtualization benefits versus virtualization challenges, if you wish, for the network provider ecosystem, and the view on security and operating integrity within the virtualized 5G network. The next thing and that's what I wanted to highlight, it's something that also George mentioned, and we had lunch together and with our group 2 and group 3, and we did cover the magnitude of the standard bodies that cover a multitude of security requirements, both 5G and telecom and so on and so forth. And we are also recommending through the reading that we do take in consideration much more the ICT ones, and as opposed to the 3GPP. The 3GPP are good, and don't get me wrong, so you should take those in consideration, and they evolve with the time, and they take the new technology in consideration. So that should be taken also with the whole package, but we should be looking at all other standards as well, and pushing on that as a way to move forward. And then we provided recommendations that came pretty much directly from the deep technical insights. And I will now hand it over to John.
All right, if you could jump to the next chart. Thanks, Michaela. Before we jump in the recommendations, one macro level observation is that, initially we thought this would be a deeply technical discussion about whether it be virtualization or telecom or the intersection thereof. And it turns out that to be candid, the technical work is already being done. The problem is the technical work in virtualization, which is quite mature and evolving, does not necessarily easily apply to the telecom ecosystem, and the telecom capabilities, standards, and technology are not necessarily fully aware of virtualization. And so what we have is a Venn diagram problem here, where you have a very large virtualization ecosystem, containers, VMs, functions. It touches cloud, enterprise, and it's been around for a very long time, that is rapidly becoming a foundational component of not just new technologies like Open RAN, but it's also plumbing underneath traditional telecom architectures. That's on one side. On the other side, you have a telecom ecosystem that is bifurcated, that it has brand new architectures like Open RAN that are essentially born in the virtualized world and are software defined and take advantage more aggressively of virtualization. And at the same time, traditional telecom architectures with Cloud RAN and vRAN are becoming virtualized architectures. And so our focus shifted from trying to solve for all of this to really try to focus on how do entities like FCC and even the US government writ large navigate this intersection that didn't exist 10 years ago, and yet is, in our view, absolutely the foundation of modern communication systems in all domains going forward. So the recommendations are a little higher level. They're really about how to navigate this intersection of virtualization into the telecom world in a very, very significant way. So a lot of the recommendations focus on how to not get in trouble, how to avoid additional fragmentation or only seeing part of the problem. So that's context for where these recommendations on this chart come from. The document is quite a bit deeper. There's lots of technical details, but at the highest level, these are the 5 that we wanted to highlight for this discussion. The first is around intergovernmental partnering, and what we realized is that the work that we did and that is relevant to the 5G and telecom networks around virtualization is very interesting, and for the FCC will provide some guidance and around understanding this space. But we immediately found that other parts of the US government are active trying to look at exactly the same problem. And our concern is if, for instance, there is a different point of view around the use of virtualization in the context of telecom coming from FCC versus Commerce versus DoD, that would be a problem. And the problem gets worse as we start to bring in other technologies that are intersecting with the virtualized telecom world, specifically zero trust. And George mentioned it in the previous discussion that these are not independent domains. The Venn diagram becomes even more complex. And so our first recommendation is that the FCC should before taking any action, have a complete survey and understand the other activities going across U.S. government, other interested parties. FCC may in fact take lead. We think this paper is a good paper to share and to use to influence other agencies. But the result should be a consistent point of view. Fragmentation will not be helpful, and unfortunately it happens. And as we go forward, we'd like to avoid that. The second is a different Venn diagram, which is public and private. Within the government, consistency would be very helpful, and we think that that's manageable. But we also need to realize that the ecosystem that provides the underlying technology to a virtualized telecom industry is enormous. It includes essentially the entire cloud and IT industries, plus the telecom industries, both legacy and modern telecom. And so it is important that we think about the best way to organize that new public-private partnership. It would not be sufficient for FCC to partner with classic telecom only, for instance, or just virtualization providers. So our second recommendation is to convene some level of let's call it the modern virtualized 5G ecosystem, and define who is that ecosystem. We acknowledge it will be a very large collection of not just companies, but academia and researchers and suppliers. But we don't believe that forward-looking policy can be done from a public-private partnership perspective if the interaction between FCC is only with a very small portion of the total ecosystem necessary to deliver these systems. The third is on overcoming obstacles and increasing vendor diversity. This was interesting because, we would like adoption of virtualization to happen, and it is. We would like adoption of Open RAN to happen, and it mostly is. We've seen some interesting moves in other areas, still some work to be done there. But the bottom line is there are existing mechanisms that already exist. There are processes to certify and validate, technology for adoption. And our guidance is to not reinvent them, modify them, evolve them. We should treat virtualized telecom like we treat telecom. If you're going to define telecom consumption and certification, modify the way you do it to encompass virtualization, to encompass Open RAN. The idea is that we do not believe it's valuable to think of these as separate industries. They are just individual technologies that give you choice about how you build out the telecom industry. And so from an interaction and certification process, our guidance is not to create a parallel path for these new technologies, but to actually modify the existing path so that we just have one way to certify and validate telecommunication technology, old or new. Number 4 on the list is to address best practices for reliability and interoperability. By enabling interaction between small and large vendors. That was a very specific ask. Here we will talk more about it in actually the next paper, because the next paper talks about financial incentives and how we can catalyze the industry. But in this paper, essentially, we basically said that you should have consistency between FCC and NIST, and that consistent behavior should be available and contemplate the idea of both small and large vendors. Now, it's a pretty abstract concept, but it turns out that most previous interactions tended to bias towards large incumbents and not realize that these new ecosystems, whether it be virtualization or Open RAN using virtualization, actually are composed not of traditional large incumbents, but of a much broader and much more diverse startup ecosystem. Open RAN has some startups, but if you extend to virtualization, there are literally thousands of startups, small companies that provide incremental value around observability, decision support, security. And so we believe that the guidance here to make sure that small and large vendors participate, first is consistency in terms of how we do that between FCC and NIST. And the second is to contemplate that the mechanisms we use are consistent and targeted and consumable by more of the cloud and IT world, which by nature includes a far larger set of small startups as constellations around the large incumbents, which is not entirely true in the classic telecom world. And then the last recommendation was one that we spent a great deal of time on, and I'll give you some startling statistics. They may not be 100% accurate, but I think they're directionally correct. One of the problems in telecom in the United States right now is that we don't have a very large industry. We've lost most of our national incumbents. More importantly, our estimate, realistically is there are probably less than 10,000 human beings in North America that have the necessary skill to build a radio. It is not a skill set that has been growing because we quite frankly do not have a large active industry. Now, what does that have to do with virtualization in telecom? Well, it turns out that that specialized skill is insufficient to build a telecom system on a virtualized environment. In order to build a telecom system using virtualization, you not only need to be able to build a radio, but you also need to understand the capabilities of things like Kubernetes and virtualization platforms and the way that they work. And so we concluded that no matter how you look at it, there is an insufficient skills base in the United States to ultimately execute broadly around this new telecom ecosystem. Now, that is not purely an FCC problem, but FCC does have weight in terms of influencing governmental programs around STEM, education, et cetera. And so our guidance here is, and it's consistent with one of the recommendations in Workgroup 2, we have got to build up a talent base. But our talent base here is a little broader than just Open RAN developers. It is we need people who understand the intersection between the virtualized ecosystem and the telecom ecosystem, and potentially have to do that work at a very low level. The perfect world, we would have a lot of radio developers that were also experts in containerization and virtualization. Today, we probably have 3. And so it's not a skill set that's broadly known. But now that we have an understanding of what this ecosystem looks like, what the tech stack looks like, what the convergence and Venn diagram looks like, we are also recommending that whatever policies are developed out of FCC recommending future workforce contemplate this more complex Venn diagram of intersecting skills, because that's actually the skill set that will be necessary to execute on absorbing virtualization into telecom, using it to improve the ecosystem, to improve security, and then ultimately to be a platform for things like the recommendations in Workgroup 2, which is to catalyze the Open RAN ecosystem. So again, these are much higher level recommendations. There's a lot more detail in the documentation, a lot of background, and also a lot of let's call it common content between Workgroup 2 around security threats and profiles that we think will be useful for people. And then the last bit I'll make for people to read the document is we also attempted to hopefully provide a reasonably understandable tutorial around both virtualization and virtualization in the telecom world, because that is not a well-known understood domain. And we think that it'll be helpful to educate people around the underlying technology before we move into the policy discussions. But these are our 5 recommendations at the top level, lots more in the document. Hopefully it is useful and informative. Again, we really want to thank the FCC for convening this, and really thank the work group. Michaela and I were very happy with the participation. It is an interesting process to do during COVID, but I think we largely got to the end of this one successfully, and the next one is going to replicate this process. So I'll pause there. Glad to answer any questions. I'll turn it back over to the lead here.
Thank you, Michaela and John. Do we have anyone who would like to speak? Sounds like we don't. Nazrin, would you like to take the vote?
Absolutely. Does anyone vote nay to these set of recommendations? Okay. I'd like to hear you if your vote is yay.
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 Okay, very good. Back to you, Suzanne.
Thank you. It sounds like the yays have it. So the report on how virtualization technologies can be used to promote 5G security and reliability is adopted. Thank you all. And now we turn to the report on WIA performance reporting with Farouk and Francisco.
Thank you, Suzanne. I start and invite Francisco to join at the end. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. So in a way of background, the original task assigned to Working Group 6 was to look into capabilities that are already in devices and see how we can improve wireless emergency alerts via and so that the user experience improve in a way of providing maps and such, and as well as provide a suite of accessibility features for those who may require some accessibility needs. So that was the original task. Next slide, please. So the objective was to consider application programming interfaces, APIs, to enable some of the features that are in the device and expose them with VIII to see how we can show, for example, a map that would indicate the alert area, and that could provide additional useful information to the user. Next slide, please. So that report, when we started, was due March of 2023. But then later on, the commissioner asked us to start a new activity on VIII performance reporting. And we were given a very short time to complete it, December 2022. And the focus of the presentation today is mainly on the December 2022 VIII performance reporting. Next slide, please. So this is the list of Working Group 6 members. And with the council's permission, I would like to go a little bit off script. So we were given the task of completing this report late August of this year. And we had to complete the work by November of this year. So we had about 3 to 4 months to complete a work that literally could have taken well over a year and a half to do it. But the working group, realizing the importance of public safety, raised the occasion, and they said, we will take on that challenge. And they did an amazing job. I can tell you that I've been chairing working groups in CSRIC for almost a decade now, and I've never seen such dedication from working group members to complete their task. As an example, just in the month of November, we had over 14 meetings, some of them like 2.5 hours long. And so it was incredible the amount of effort this working group put to it. So I really want to, go on the record appreciating, thanking the working group. I also want to highlight our editor, Terry Brooks of T-Mobile USA, that did a wonderful job. And, give you an example, one time we had 2 days back-to-back meetings. At the end of the first day, there were like 4 or 5 contributions that they were agreed. In a matter of hours, she incorporated those into the baseline, published a new baseline, submitted a new contribution of her own, and made comments on other people's. So I don't know how she did that, but Terry, thank you very much for doing that. And I would be remiss if I don't add and thank Atis for providing the tools that really, really facilitate our work. Thank you to Atis. Next slide, please. Of course, in addition to the working group members, we have these alternates that often are more participating in the activities of the working group. So everything I said, thanking the working group members, also goes to the alternates. All right, let's get to the details now. So the new report that we were asked to complete in a matter of 3 to 4 months was on VIII performance reporting. And the idea is that VIII is a one-way broadcast service. It doesn't have any return signal to provide any performance reporting. But there was a view that additional insight into reliability, latency, and accuracy would be useful, and it would assist alert originators in planning alert and build public confidence. So we were asked to look into how to do that reliability, latency, and accuracy. And I will define what that means in the next few slides. So next slide, please. So some few background information. Many folks are very familiar with VIII system, but just for background, we have a number of stakeholders. Starting from left, we have the alert originators, which then they will go to FEMA's iPods Open, and there's an alert aggregator part, and then there's a gateway that connects to CMSB gateway. And CMSB is it's basically the carriers, cellular mobile service providers, and there's a I use a lot of acronyms here. There's actually a list of acronyms at the end, just in case. In addition to going to CMSB, it goes through a PBS warrant system, through a C1 interface for diversity. From there, it goes through CMSB infrastructure and eventually to mobile devices. So that's the end-to-end system of wireless emergency alert. Next slide, please. So let's do a couple of definitions. We have this thing called broadcast area, which is the geographic area selected for the VIA broadcast. And we have the alert area. I mean, if you look at the picture, it's, the picture explains it much better than I do. So the blue is the alert area that is sent by the alert originator. And then based on that blue area, then carriers would lit up some cell sectors, and that would be the broadcast area that you see here in pink. Next slide, please. So we mentioned accuracy, latency, and reliability. Here's some overall performance metrics definition of those. Accuracy being the number of devices inside the alert area with that 0.1 mile allowance that presented the VIA divided by the total number of devices that presented the VIA. So is the number of devices that divided by the ones that presented. Latency is the time between when the alert originator sent the information until the device presented the information. And reliability is proportion of devices within the alert area that received and appropriately processed the alert. So these are the high-level definitions. Next slide, please. In addition to those definitions, alert originator provided some additional clarification and needs to those definitions. For example, for reliability, they said we can make it even more accurate by talking about the number of mobile devices that received the alert and presented it successfully versus the mobile devices that received the alert but did not present it. And I'm not going to go through all these bullets. So basically, they provided additional details into that definition that we made earlier to make it more clear, clarify on what are their needs with respect to those performance metrics. Next slide, please. So with respect to latency, we talked about from the alert originator all the way to when the alert is presented, but now you can see that they are actually defined a little bit more precisely, a little bit more granular, if you will, that talks about when the FEMA iPods got it, when CMSB got it, when PBS gateway got it, and so forth. So these are the additional parameters that the alert originator felt it would be useful to characterize latency. Next slide, please. Finally, with respect to accuracy, they said that things like average distance outside the alert area, median distance outside the alert area, maximum distance, and minimum distance outside the alert area, those are additional information that could help them understand the performance of VIA better. So that was the definition of characteristic, and this is some additional information provided for alert originator. Next slide, please. So we analyzed 3 proposals to see how we can address this performance system. One of them is on state local VIA test, and we go through all these things in a lot more detail. The next one is automated performance reporting from opt-in consumer devices. These are consumer devices that have already accepted to receive the performance and provide feedback. And the third one is automated reporting from stage devices. And we will explain this a little bit more detail in next slides. Next slide, please. So let's start with the state VIA local test. And this is a system that has been around for a long time. It started back in 2016 based on the FCC's 4th report and order. And this is FCC, FEMA, CMSPs, and state and local public safety. They've used this frequently since it was introduced and it was implemented. So it's been around and well used. The capability allows for control testing done by alert origin. So alert originators can use it as they wish. And you can have this group of test participants, and you can see T and P are capitalized in test participants because we're talking about a well-known group of folks that we will be doing this test. And we will have the characteristics such as dates and time and so forth. So we using state local via test to do performance reporting. So let's go to the details. Next slide, please. So we talked about reliability, latency, and accuracy. How does state and local via test address those? With respect to reliability, devices can do the reporting. And at first, I'm sorry, it's a little bit of eye chart, and maybe the font is a little bit small, but I wanted to kind of put it into one slide for everyone to see it. And the report obviously has a lot more detail on it. But with respect to reliability, the test participants can present the alert based upon the location of device and so forth. The service provider can provide some device setting and so forth. So the point here is that reliability can be analyzed well using state via local test. Same with latency, since we have a test participant looking at the device, they can provide time of presentation and additional detail. Alert originator can do time the alert was initiated, and FEMA also can provide some additional time, and CMSPs provide some additional. So there is information that is available based on state local via test. And accuracy is also possible because we know the location and time at the time of presentation. So we can, based on the location that we know, we can find out all the information that was needed by accuracy. And also, in addition, the polygon generated is reported by alert originator. So that information, so based on the description that provided, state local via test can provide reliability, latency, and accuracy. Next slide, please. So now we talk about the next option, which is automated performance reporting from opt-in consumer devices. This is again the various stakeholder and VIA provide automated reporting, and you can see there are there are 4 steps that you can do. Consumer, for example, would opt in their device that enable the device to provide feedback, automated feedback, and so it collects and shares the VIA data back to a centralized place in a way that is very important. It needs to be anonymized at the collection point. So this is, it needs to be anonymized. It's very important for the privacy issues. Also, number 2, performance metrics data collection. The VIA stakeholders that we described earlier collect message receipt and present and presentation and perform related data. The reporting the performance data. So after next step, we do the reporting of the performance data by the VIA stakeholders. And finally, the analysis is done. And so this can be done based on this automated performance reporting. Next slide, please. So now we go and look at the different aspects that we talked about, reliability and so forth. So reliability, we start with reliability. One issue that came up is, if you remember, the definition of reliability was the number of devices that presented it compared to the total number of devices in the alert area. And one comment, one aspect that was provided is that the number of devices that our users have opted in, allowing performance reporting, that number of the total number of devices in the alert area may be unknown. because it's a dynamic and cannot be obtained directly. So that was one perspective that was presented, that we don't know how many devices are in alert area. But then there was another perspective presented that there are tools available that can estimate to some degree of accuracy the number of devices in a specific area. So we were given two different perspectives of whether that reliability can be done or not. So after consulting with the FCC and so forth, we decided that the best thing to do is capture both perspectives in our report. And you will see in the recommendations that we have just done that we said, yes, we understand that some folks may consider from privacy and so forth that we don't know the total number of devices, but then there are tools that we have seen in the market that they have done just that. So we have presented both perspectives in our report. Next slide, please. But when it comes to latency is a lot easier. We can do that reporting from the original, from all the stakeholders, original the iPods, PBS, CMSP, and mobile device. We can get a date and time stamp of when that message passed. So latency using this opt-in consumer device is a little bit more straightforward. Obviously, this needs work to be done, but at least the process is fairly straightforward. Next slide, please. Now, with respect to accuracy, remember this figure that I have the lower right corner. The idea is that when we get the alert area, there is a purposeful overcast of the overshoot of the message when it's broadcasted, because we want to make sure that we cover at least the alert area. So you can see the pink area is much larger than the blue area. So overshoot has some primary cases, and it's unable to determine the exact location. Its location, the user has location turned off and so forth. So there are potentially some challenges with respect to accuracy, but at the end of the day, an indication that the DVIA was presented can be done from the mobile device. So that can be done. Next slide, please. Now, we go now look into the automated reporting with stage devices, and this is an interesting concept that it's just like the previous case that we discussed, but in this scenario, there are stage devices that we know exact location of them, and that helps address some of the issues that we had on the unknowns that we had previously. So next slide. So if we look at with respect to the reliability, latency, and accuracy, previously we said reliability may be challenged, but now you can see that we know the alert area definition and language provided. So we can have reporting from the alert originator, and we can do the reporting from stakeholder, as well as the latency. As we discussed before, we can have timestamp across all the stakeholders there. And more importantly, with respect to accuracy, that we had challenges before, but now that we know the device locations and there are the reported data list above for reliability and so forth. So we know we don't need to even do any reporting. We have that information available to us. So next slide, please. So recommendations. So we basically, given our limited 3 months, 4 months max time that we had, we did a thorough, detailed analysis of the options that we had, and we are kindly asking the FCC to consider our findings in the report. We also, based on the discussion that we had, we have another recommendation, and this one, again, we really didn't have a lot of time. This was something that came up that it's important for communication between stakeholders. So we thought that it would be useful if the commissioner would consider a requirement for an automated email to convey via performance reporting information from CMSPs and from PBS to AOs and so forth. So to be fair, we really didn't spend a lot of time on the second recommendation, but I thought we thought the working group thought that this is something that would be useful to have, so we decided to include it. As I mentioned earlier, that we had in some areas, we had different perspectives, and it was a very healthy discussion amongst the different players. So we have included a section in section 521 of the report, a perspective from alert originator on via automated performance reporting, that they provided some very useful data, as well as we have a section 522 that has a detailed perspective from cellular industry to make sure that we capture all the information from all sides. So I think that's the last slide. Next slide, please. So I will, we always use alphabet soup, and so we use these things so often that we thought that it would be useful to have the alphabet soup somewhere included. Next slide, please. Yeah, so at this point, I will open the floor and let me see if Francisco has anything to add, and maybe we can open the floor for question and comments. Francisco, did you have anything to add?
Nothing to add for Rick. You covered it all. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So Susanna and Nasrin, back to you.
Great. Would anyone like to speak?
Yeah, this is Tom Swanabori from CTI. I'd like to make a comment.
Great.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for all your work, Farouk, and others on who participated on the team. CTA really commends the efforts of Working Group 6 to be able to quickly produce such a report on via performance reporting. And we really value the partnership the wireless industry has with the FCC, with FEMA, and the alert originators that has made WIA a successful life-saving tool to date. And as the report recognizes, and Farouk pointed out, we must exercise caution when considering changes to WIA that could risk the unintended and possibly negative impacts to system performance and reliability. And there's also privacy concerns, particularly when there are existing capabilities that can serve the goal of increasing awareness and confidence in WIA. So we look forward to continued work with the partners to ensure that WIA remains a critical element of keeping all Americans safe. And again, thank you to all the working group members for your work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else? Mark?
Yes.
Hi, thank you. Mark Reddish from APCO. I just wanted to briefly comment on a few aspects of the report. Many of APCO's members, including those in 911 centers, are involved with issuing alerts, and certainly emergency alerts can impact their public safety operations in several ways. I also, like Tom, want to say I really appreciate the work that went into this report, and in particular, the sections that present the alert originator's perspective really provide helpful information that can be used to improve alerting. For example, for enhanced geo-targeting, it's important to be addressing problems with over-alerting, and APCO's expressed concern, including in FCC comments, that the existing geo-targeting requirements may have been misinterpreted by the industry. So we really think it's interesting and valuable that the report's recommendations about data on geo-targeting performance are included. I have to say, I'm sorry that I found some of the commentary in the report representing the industry perspective to be a little bit unconstructive. At times, it even appears dismissive of the alert originator's opinion on the value of automated performance data, and it wrongly states that performance data would not impact the use of WIA. From APCO's perspective, performance data will increase transparency, improve public safety agencies' trust in the system, and help the FCC, service providers, and others identify opportunities for improvement. In a recent FNPRM, the FCC even recognized that WIA is underutilized in part due to alert originators' lack of confidence in the system. So it was strange to see that this was a subject of disagreement within CSRIC. With that said, I truly do commend the group for the significant effort it took to overcome the differing perspectives and produce a report with valuable information, especially in the very, very short time frame they had. So I want to say thank you to the co-chairs, Farouk and Francisco, and other members of the working group who took time to speak with me about the report. And I appreciate the opportunity to offer this comment.
Thank you, Mark. Looks like Drew Moran would
Yep.
like to speak.
Thanks, Suzanne. T-Mobile supports the goals of WIA, and we also commend the efforts of this working group. It's an Herculean effort in such a short time. We believe it's important, though, to provide ample time to fully explore these complex technical and policy considerations associated with any proposal that could require significant modifications to the existing system and its processes to help mitigate these risks that are unforeseen. Thus, we agree with CTIA's concerns, and we strongly encourage further exploration among the technical stakeholders as to the feasibility and benefits of any new automated measures to capture system performance metrics before we move forward on this front. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Is there anyone else? All right, I think Nazrin, I'll turn it over to you for the vote.
Very
Oh,
good.
wait, no, it looks like Harold actually.
One more. Okay.
It looks like Harold Feld's hand just went up. Harold, would you like to speak?
Yes, I just wanted to add that I appreciate everybody's efforts in this regard, and just wish to add that among other concerns that are important are privacy concerns. I mean, obviously, all consumers benefit when there is more accurate accuracy in the WIA alert system, including when these processes can assist the alert originators. At the same time, I just need to observe that one of the issues that came up in the discussions in the working group, even though we're talking about self-reporting on the consumer side, nevertheless, some of the capabilities that might be necessary to produce the results that the alert originators were hoping to collect did raise some concerns over privacy issues that might be raised. And so more time to look at these issues is important from multiple perspectives.
Thank you, Harold. I think that I saw Cicely Wolf's hand go up.
Yeah, I just I thank everyone for writing a well-crafted and very thoughtful report. But I just wanted to mention that from the USGS perspective, performance data is very important for the Shake Alert earthquake early warning system. With Shake Alert, we're talking about giving people precious seconds to take protective actions. So we really would benefit from reliable information about WIA performance. So I just wanted to get it on the record, is that there are use cases from at least one alert originator, Shake Alert, that this performance data, if it could be made technically available and overcome some of the hurdles that have been raised, would have a lot of value for our system and for policy implications. And I'll also note that in Alaska, the NOAA tsunami warning system, there have been a number of press articles in the media that were quite negative, owing to problems with WIA over alerting for subduction zone, potentially tsunamigenic subduction zone earthquakes, and over alerting to areas that weren't in a subduction zone threat. And if you look at those articles, they raise a lot of questions about WIA. And again, I think in those examples, those would have benefited if there had been some sort of, quantitative performance data available to assess whether WIO was a factor or not, in those incidents that caused a lot of public confusion and concern. So, again, thank you to both sides for a really excellent and thoughtful report. And, both perspectives need to be considered and not taken lightly. But I just, from an alert originator perspective, wanted to make that point.
Those points are very well taken, Cicely. I appreciate that. Is there anyone else? All right, Najrin, I think it's now for you to take a vote, please.
Very good. Does anyone vote nay to this report? I'd like to hear you with your yay responses.
Aye.
Yay.
Aye. Yay. Yay. Yay.
Yay.
Yay. Yay.
All right. We also had Andrew's comment to abstain from voting. With that, I'll pass it back on to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Najrin. It sounds like the yays have it. And with that vote, the report on WIO performance reporting is adopted. We will now move over to progress presentations by the remaining 3 working groups. First to go are Brian Daly and Travis Russell for Working Group 1 on 5G signaling protocol security.
Thank you, Suzanne. Brian's having some connection difficulties, so I'm going to present, and hopefully my connection will stay quick. I had to switch over to cellular here, so I lost access on the web. If you could go to slide 77. The only thing that I wanted to point out here is we continue to have a bit of attrition. There were some industry layoffs that affected yet another member, so we did lose yet another valuable member to the organization. If you go to slide 79, however, we're still on track. We're still doing bi-weekly virtual meetings. We just had our last meeting for the year, given the holidays. Just seemed prudent to cancel the last December meeting. And so we will be reconvening in I think the first or the second week of January. But we're in excellent shape. If you go to slide 80, so we're actually ahead of schedule. So as I said, we're not going to have any trouble meeting the deadline for the second report. We did take a bit of a different approach because so much of what we're doing, in this report is we identified the vulnerabilities. Now we're going to identify the mitigations for that and the recommendations. So it just made sense to combine that into one. So we took the report that we submitted earlier this year. We've added sections in that report now for the mitigation and recommendations. And so it'll be one cohesive report with all of the content together. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. Next, we will go to Mary Boyd and Mark Reddish on Working Group 4, 911 service over Wi-Fi.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll take lead for Work Group 4's update this afternoon. Mark Reddish, as you know, is online, so Mark, jump in if you want to add to this quick update. Next slide, just a friendly reminder, Work Group 4 is focused on the public safety benefits, the feasibility and the cost for making Wi-Fi access points and unlicensed spectrum available to the public to facilitate the access for emergency services. We do continue to look at all the options to add to the toolbox of 911 connectivity. Next slide, please. Our objectives really were to convene the stakeholders that I'll quickly review here in just a few minutes to look at all the technical issues with the goal of promoting a consensus and a Wi-Fi ecosystem to support reliable 911 service, and that's for voice and text under not only normal circumstances, but also catastrophic events. Next slide, please. Our working group is made up between members and alternates. We are 53 strong. We do have, we've had very good participation, and it's a broad representation from government elected officials to public safety representation, network providers, as well as endpoint manufacturers and device manufacturers. So we have a broad range of representation. Next slide, please. Our alternates are also very, very supportive, very active. I'm going to call out Mr. Barina. Again, he does serve as our editor, project manager on this massive task. And without Tom, I'm sure there's a lot of us that would be a whole lot more busy. And so, Tom, thank you for your dedication to the project. All right, next slide, please. As I've reported before, Mark's reported, we've had 3 sub-teams active: technical, tech feasibility, public safety benefits, and cost analysis. Those at this point now have just commingled into one large working group as we near the end of our report, which is due in March of next year. Our baseline report is in draft. Next slide, please. The framework includes currently contributions, but as noted in progress, we are still receiving contributions and working diligently to get those reviewed, vetted, and incorporated into the report. We've already incorporated use cases that have been adopted by the working group. I'm going to reiterate the dedication of this team as we meet weekly. And you'll see on the next slide, please. As we near the finish line on this project, we have extended the length of our meetings. We go 2 hours and longer. We were going to discuss that again today. We have a meeting right after the CSRIC call to continue our review of contributions and consider extending and more longer meetings and more meetings in January. So heads up to the working group members who are just now hearing that. We are, as I indicated, editing the draft report, and we are on track at this point. And I believe that concludes the report for Work Group 4.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
And now, last but not least, Working Group 5, Managing Software and Cloud Services Supply Chain, Security for Communications Infrastructure, Todd and Padma.
Hello, everybody. Todd Gibson, T-Mobile, and we also have Padma Sudarsan. She's also on the call. So we'll give you all a quick update today. If you could go to the next slide. Next slide. Yep. So as a reminder, just again, a background from a supply chain perspective of what was asked in the original charter. And what we are specifically trying to focus on at the bottom is recommend those best practices to mitigate the risks and the various identified vulnerabilities. So if you could go to the next slide. So just like the others have said, the work group is comprised of a good, healthy mix of various subject matter experts that are very active in the discussions and participation and putting content to paper. And so definitely appreciate their support. I do want to state, at least for the second report, our rapporteurs are John-Luc Baker from BlackBerry, as well as Tim May from NTIA. And so definitely want to call them out for their support and stepping up to provide that service for us. So I really appreciate it. So next slide. And we also have a good, healthy mix of alternates. I'll call out a few here in a second as we move forward, but let's go to the next slide. So we had two reports that were due. The first one was completed. We delivered that report in September, which again, Padma and I presented that to you, and you reviewed it and approved it. So appreciate that. The next report we have is on supply chain security of infrastructure and network management systems. That report is due in June. And the report's going to focus on the hardware side and as well as the network management side. And collectively, what we've done so far, or not so far, we started this very early in October, is putting some definitions and scopes together for the hardware, the infrastructure piece, and then network management systems. And so very briefly, from an infrastructure perspective, the work group defines that as a set of facilities and equipment that enables communication services. And so this report the May report will focus on the communication services infrastructure, that being software controlled hardware such as routers, radios, and servers that's within the FCC's purview, and that the physical transport media, that being like optical, electrical communications cabling, is out of scope. And so that's what we've worked very closely with SASWAT, who is our liaison, to get some clarification on that with the chairwoman's office. And then also from a network management system perspective, the definition and kind of scope that we put together is that we define that as an application or a collection of applications that enables the network service provider to intelligently manage and operate the networks, network segments, and associated network services, including the individual devices that are delivering the communication services. And so from a broad perspective, that's really what we put, and that's kind of going to be, we defined those definitions to put some blinders on us for this next report, and that's kind of where we're going to put that effort and emphasis on it. Our meeting schedule currently is every 2 weeks. We do have a meeting tomorrow, and then we will not be meeting until next time it's in January. So we are going to cancel the meeting that was on schedule between Christmas and New Year. So next slide. So far, we've had some SME presentations from Addis, and as well as from Chris Otway, Tom Anderson at Addis, and Chris Otway at Verizon, who was representing the DHS ICT Scrum task group. So really appreciate Kathy Dwyer's support at Verizon to get Chris to come give us a presentation. And then also Carlos, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but from Nokia. Sorry about that. I'm not good with some of those longer word names there, but for network control management. And appreciate Martin McGrath's support on getting Carlos to come give the work group a really good presentation. We do have a presentation scheduled tomorrow from Ericsson and Mohammed Khalid. I appreciate your support there. And then we've got other ones from Rakuten, and then VMware, which Padma, my co-chair, was also very instrumental in getting those set up. And then we're still working on some mobile network operator perspectives, and we're hoping to get that M&O perspective into the work group as well. And then I do want to add that, just in the past day or so, we did add another SME presentation onto the schedule, which Tamber Ray with the Rural Broadband Association was able to help get us a SME from CISA. Peter Colombo to come give us a presentation, and we've got that scheduled for early February. So next slide. And so, again, I already talked about this. We worked very closely to get those definitions defined for infrastructure network management systems. We do have the two co-rapporteurs, which again are Tim May and John-Luc Baker. And we do have the framework for the report completed. We've already got some content being populated. We should have another batch of updates coming in from Tom Anderson tomorrow. So next slide. And then we have started assigning names and to author specific subsections. This is going to be our next steps, right? So our next steps are going to continue to assign names to those subsections and start putting some pen to paper or fingers to keyboards. And then we're going to continue with our SME presentations, continue with those already scheduled, and hopefully firm updates for those still unscheduled. Next slide. And that is it for the report. Padma, did I miss anything? Do you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it all. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Padma. All right, back to you, Suzanne.
Thank you very much. Billy Bob, would you like to speak?
Sure. Great. Thanks, Suzanne. And I want to say thanks to everyone here today, starting with Deborah and your leadership from the FCC assembling and putting together this kind of a forum where we could really have a collaborative and spirited set of discussions across all the various working groups. I think that that last discussion with working group 6 in the comments, that were certainly spirited, a little bit divergent, but certainly collaborative in tone from all of the members, clearly demonstrates that we all recognize that we're in this together and we're just trying to do the right thing for public safety, for the safety of the citizens, and ensuring that our national security is well taken care of as we consider all these important topics. So continue to stay engaged, continue to stay focused. Look forward to the continued discussions and the work over the next several months.
Thank you very much, Billy Bob. With that, I'd like to express the Commission's thanks for the referral of all 3 of the reports. We appreciate the effort and the expertise that goes into this work. We will utilize them to support the FCC's mission and provide guidance in the network security and public safety arenas. The next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, March 21st, and will be, fingers crossed, in person with a call-in option, so it'll be hybrid. 2 weeks prior to the March meeting, you will receive 1 draft report. It's Working Group 4's report on 911 service over Wi-Fi. If you have any questions or concerns, you will receive instructions to contact the working group co-chairs, Mary and Mark, to discuss. And with that, I announce the 6th meeting of CSRIC 8 is officially closed. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne and all.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Happy holidays to everybody.
Yep. Same to you, Suzanne. Everybody else, happy holidays.